Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for another in our series of artist talks with Roberts Camera. I am Steve Goldsmith with Hasselblad. Joining me today is our John Scott from Roberts Camera and our guest today, Dave Jordano. So welcome to all of you and welcome to you guys. Glad you could join us. Again, today we're here to talk about Dave's work and Dave as an artist. And we will have this be an interactive event. So if you have questions, you can certainly post those on the dashboard, and we'll try and get those answered for you. The presentation will mainly be myself and John and Dave and a PowerPoint presentation. And without any further ado, let's get that rolling. So hopefully you see my screen now. So we'll get started now. Today's agenda, we'll start off just giving you a brief rundown. So we'll talk a little bit about Roberts Camera, first of all, and then a little bit about Dave and his background. We'll talk a brief minute about what Dave shoots with and what he carries around in his gear bag. And then we'll get to the heart of the matter. The meat of the matter is Dave's images and what his creative eye has created. And then if we have time at the end, we'll have some time for a discussion and try and answer some of your online questions as well. But right now, I'm going to turn this over to John Scott. He's going to tell us a little bit about Roberts Camera.
Hello, good morning and good afternoon. As Steve said, thanks very much for joining us today. Roberts Camera is a third generation family business. We're brick and mortar located in Indianapolis, Indiana. We have 2 locations. You can see pictures there on your screen. And we're moving into our third generation of ownership here in the last handful of years. So you can see that it started out Robert, it was Bob and Rose, and then their son Bruce, who has run the company for the majority of our years. And Meredith and Corey are our future going forward. Roberts is a great local camera shop, but we extend coast to coast, and we have a great team of people here that can handle special equipment like Hasselblad. We're a proud Hasselblad dealer. We're happy to do things like this and get our name out there in the world. You can see there how to contact us. You see us on robertscamera.com or visit our used company, Used Photo Pro. And if you have any direct questions for us, please give us a call or email anytime. Also have the pleasure today very much of introducing Mr. Dave Jordano. Dave's a very talented, very capable photographer. I've had the pleasure of knowing Dave for a handful of years and helping support him in his endeavors. And Dave's going to talk a little bit about his background and what got him started in photography. And I'm very excited to see Dave's images today. So, Dave, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks, John. Well, first off, I guess I should just mention how I got into photography. And it's been 52 years now that I've been a photographer. And I discovered photography while I was in the Army stationed in Nuremberg, Germany. A friend of mine had an Instamatic camera one Saturday morning, and he asked me if I would take a picture of him, and he would take a picture of me, and we'd go down to the local photo lab on the base and develop the film, make some prints, and send them back to our parents. And I said, I've got nothing else to do that morning. I said, sure, why not? So he let me develop that first roll of film, and I just have to say that the moment I stepped into that darkroom, it was like an epiphany. It was like a religious experience almost. I just said, this is amazing. This is so cool. I didn't know this was such a phenomenal thing to do. And I said, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. And no one really believed me at the time, but it turned out that, yeah, it was my lifesaver, discovering photography. So while my time there, I had a mentor. Her name was Frau Nassvogel, and she was the lady that ran the local photo lab on the base. So my first roll of film, I made a contact sheet, and she looked at it and she said, oh, geez, you have to be a photographer. You photograph things that no one else does. So I'm going to help you become that photographer. So she actually helped me for the first year and a half as a mentor. And then I came back to the States and entered photography program at the Center for Creative Studies in Detroit, and got a BFA in 1974. And as a student, I did a lot of early documentary black and white work with a 4x5 view camera on the street the streets of Detroit. So that was sort of like my foundation. And my influences were Andre Cortege, Walker Evans, Ajay, Bill Brandt, all these early 20th and early 20th century great black and white photographers. Those were the people that really influenced me. That lasted during the time that I was in college, and then when I graduated, I had to make a living. So I worked at a museum for a couple of years, and that got me stuck in the darkroom making black and white prints, and it wasn't very fulfilling for me. So I quit that and decided I was just going to work on my own, do my own thing. So I moved to Chicago in 1977 to establish my own studio, and I had a wonderful commercial career photographing food and product ads for major Fortune 500 companies. And it was again until about 2000 that I kind of got back into my own fine art projects and developing a series with black and white originally on Chicago bridges, and then I moved into other projects where I moved into color. And then I went digital in 2004 with the first Hasselblad, the H1. And I've been a Hasselblad user ever since then. And just every time a new system comes out, it's a great improvement. So I upgrade to the next system. So now I'm using the H60.
So Dave, you're using the H6050C now with a complement of our lenses and our tilt shift adapter. We do thank you for being a Hasselblad owner and loyal to the brand for many years. I know I've walked with you through a couple of the upgrades, and it's been a pleasure to work with you. And I know that we've worked with John at Roberts as well. It's pretty cool how your start became your career, and and while it's work, I'm assuming you're pretty much doing what you enjoy to do.
Oh yeah, I've always enjoyed photography. I mean, even if you're working at it, it's pleasurable. You if you love what you do, it's not work. So
Very cool.
I was very
Well, you're
fortunate.
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say I was very fortunate with a wonderful career as a commercial photographer, and I always felt I was a creative person doing commercial work as much as I was a creative person doing personal work. So I always kept the two, equally in love of, doing the process. So, and that was important. So.
Very cool. Well, you mentioned you're from Detroit. You went to school in Detroit, and that brings us right back to Detroit. And we'd like to start today, if you don't mind, with your Detroit Unbroken Down series.
Yeah.
So we'll just go through the images, and you can and give us the heart of the image and your thoughts on it, and we'll go from there. So let's take a look at this first image from the series Detroit Unbroken Down.
Well, let me start by saying how and why I went back to Detroit. I mean, living in Chicago for almost 30 years and leaving Detroit, I didn't know a whole lot about Detroit all that time. I would go back and visit family, but I didn't really investigate the city all that much until other photographers were coming out with books about Detroit around 2009. And all of these books were concentrating on all the abandonment and emptiness and the dystopian landscape of what Detroit had become over the years. And I was shocked when I saw these books. I thought, geez, this is not how I remember Detroit when I was there as a student in the 70s. So I made it a commitment to go back and try to say a different story, flip the cards a little bit about what it was that I felt Detroit was like. So I started the project in 2010 as a rephotography project where I just went back and rephotographed architectural landmarks that I photographed in the 70s to see the difference between the time frame and what happened to the structures. But I did that for like 2 weeks, and then during that time I reassociated myself with the city a little bit. And I just felt like I needed to photograph the neighborhoods and the people that are still living there, struggling, persevering, trying to get by in a city that, you know, has really fallen on hard times. So that was sort of like my focus, was to give a human aspect to the city. So I started going through mostly the underprivileged and distressed neighborhoods in the city. Because when you look at the population of the city, you know, like 75, 80% of the people are African American. They're mostly living in distressed neighborhoods. The unemployment rate is like, now it's like 35% during the pandemic going on. But my focus was trying to get to learn people, who they were, how they were living, how they were coping with this harsh environment. So this first photograph is a picture of Cynthia and her family, and those are her grandchildren. And the lady on the right is her daughter-in-law. And the flag is actually a memorial. This wasn't taken on Memorial Weekend, but it's actually a memorial to her son who died in the Iraqi wars. So she kept that flag up all the time. And they were, you know, they were a struggling family. This is a picture of Arthur, and he was an ex-convict that just got out of prison. And like most convicts, it's difficult to find a job, to get employed. And he had a hard time doing that. So he opened up this little candy shop in the back of his girlfriend's apartment, and opened it for the neighborhood kids. And he also sold, you know, non-perishable items that were easy to inventory and put in his shop. So this is what he was doing for a living. He was just selling, you know, like, you know, 50-cent and dollar package candy. But he was doing a great thing for his neighborhood, you know, and supporting what was going on there, and keeping a nice lookout for the kids that were in the neighborhood, who often came and hung around his place.
So Dave, when you're doing these photographs, do you approach the subject first, discuss things with them, talk to them a little bit, or is it just more traditional street type photography where you're just, you know, photographing the landscape?
Well, you know, a lot of it just happens from just driving around the city. I mean, I don't know how many times I'd use up an entire tank of gas on my car in one day driving around the city. So as soon as you are lucky enough to come down the street and see something that's interesting to you, then, you know, you have to make the decision. Do you want to get out of your car? Do you want to go and approach them? And this is something that I always kind of struggled with. You know, I was never really a portrait photographer per se. I mean, I shot food and product ads for all those years. So getting out of the car and then approaching someone was really kind of like a struggle for me, but
Sure.
I found a real necessity to do it. You know, this was important for me, you know, to get my story out. So yeah, and once I did this several times, I realized, you know, this is not that difficult to do. You know, you're just being friendly to somebody. So I usually would try to start up a conversation, and we would talk for a while, sometimes a half an hour, or even an hour, to get to know each other and stuff, and sort of like get them to trust me in a sense before I even brought the camera out of the car. So that's the way it would go. And you know, I made a lot of friends, hundreds of friends, while I was working on this project. So
What can you tell us about Brad?
Brad was unemployed again, like most people that I photographed. And he didn't want to do anything illegal. He didn't want to sell drugs or anything. So this was an open field. It was an abandoned site that had metal in it. So it's kind of like a used metal yard and stuff. And there were several pits being dug in this plot of land. And all these guys were digging the metal out and then separating it in the cans. And then at the end of the day, they would take it down to the recycling facility and cash in. So Brad would make about $100 a day. And he would actually he'd take out about a ton of metal.
Wow.
It was amazing. And every time I went back to that location, I would see him working. So he was a really cool guy, you know, and he was just trying to do something for himself that was productive and safe, and actually doing something good for the environment.
Yep, help clean up the mess we've made. Yep.
Yeah. This is a photograph of Cornell, who was, again, you know, unemployed, homeless. And he was living in this senior citizen complex that was for veterans, retired veterans. So in the front foyer, there was all of these paintings on the wall about freedom and, you know, military use and stuff. So I thought this was a great portrait to put him against the door, standing underneath "Don't Tread on Me" with a Detroit Police T-shirt. So he was, you know, very prone to wanting to buy this building. He said, "I can go down to City Hall and I can purchase this building for $1." You know, and I said, "Well, okay,
Wow.
if you, it'd be great." But that wasn't actually true, but that's what he believed that he could do. So he was living in this building and taking care of it. But I really love positioning him in that position with all of the patriotic paintings surrounding him. This is a photograph of some firemen that were putting out a fire on the building to the right, and that was an arson fire. And if you know anything about Detroit, usually they have this thing on the night before Halloween called Devil's Night. And it was a night where people would go out and torch abandoned buildings in the city. And there were sometimes 8,500 fires going on Devil's Night. It was an epidemic back in the 80s. But since then, they have the thing now called Angels Night, which is the same night, but it's people in the neighborhood who would canvass in the neighborhood and protect all the abandoned structures on their street. And that reduced the amount of arson fires dramatically. But these guys had just put this fire out and were just resting on the roof of the other house. And it made for a beautiful photograph of them. That's a picture of Lemmy, who actually I found him on an article that was written in the Metro Times. And he was actually a raccoon hunter. And I kind of tracked him down and found out where he lived. And when I met him, he asked me if I would like to have some raccoon meat. And so he pulled out this big piece of meat out of his freezer. And he said, "I can cook this for you." And I said, "Well, no, thank you." It looked not quite, you know, like what I would be interested in eating. But
yeah,
I
I'm sure
noticed that he had some.
I'm sure it tastes like chicken, right? You know.
Probably. I'm sure it's probably pretty good. But anyway.
Yeah.
But I noticed that he had a couple of guitars in his house. And I said, "Oh, you have some guitars you play?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, I play the blues." And I said, "Well, I would love to photograph you, you know, playing your guitar." So
He looks
that's
like a blues man.
Oh, yeah, he's fantastic. He played really well.
Very good.
And probably played for me for like an hour and a half. And I've been back to see Lemmy several times. And he just had his 80th birthday last year, so he's still doing well.
That's good to hear. So you've made some relationships that you've kept going through the years from this. What can you tell us about Hakeem and what's he sitting in front of?
Well, this is a room up on the second floor of his house. He bought this house at the Detroit Land Bank auction for $500. And he's still living there. He's been there several years. The house is still pretty much in, you know, original condition when he bought it. But he had this room upstairs where he would write quotes and slogans and write his own little quips about life and, you know, his faith in, he had rediscovered his faith in the Muslim faith. And this room was completely covered with these writings from wall to ceiling. It was amazing. It took me about 5 visits to him for him to even let me go up there and look at this room and photograph him in there. But he was very protective of it. But we
And
became good friends. Yeah.
when you're shooting indoors, these environmental portraits, are you shooting mainly available light? Do you bring any additional lighting with you, or is it all available light?
It varies, but 90% of the time I'm using available light. The picture of Glemmy that you saw back 2 pictures back, I shot that with a strobe with an umbrella. Hakeem, though, I photographed him. That was a 6-second exposure when I photographed him, and he stayed pretty still. He was pretty good.
Yeah.
This is another house that Jewel, she had bought in the land bank for $500 too, and she was fixing it up. And this is a portrait of her on her back door. And she had already installed, the security cam you can see above the
door. Yeah.
flag. Yeah, so she was starting to fix the place up. This is another picture.
Did he know you were there?
No, he didn't. He was sleeping the whole time I was there. But this is the same building that I shot Cornell in at the senior citizens complex. So this was another guy who had taken over this room and was living in here. So, but yeah, he obviously was very comfortable sitting on 3 mattresses.
We've got a question from Kenneth. He's asking.
What's that?
We've got a question from online from Kenneth. He says, "Does the COVID-19 lockdown give you any inspiration for additional material?" And everyone else out there, feel free to pose these questions, and I will get them read as quickly as I can. So keep the questions coming in. Go ahead, Dave.
No, not really. I've been really quite, like stuck in my home for the last 6 months, not really doing much. I've gone out and made a couple of photo sessions in Chicago here, but I haven't gone back to Detroit. I can't imagine how bad things are. They are in Detroit right now with like I said, the unemployment rate's at 35%. That's crazy. That's 3 times more than the national average right now. So just when Detroit was starting to make a comeback, it gets hit with this pandemic that's really devastated the city, I'm sure. Well, if you go back to the before. Yeah, these were some kids that they did a makeshift BMX park on an abandoned tennis court, which I thought was pretty cool. This was taken at the Brewster Douglas housing project that was just on the near east side of the city. This has been completely torn down now, and it's probably going to be developed into some kind of housing project. But I really reveled at these kids, their ingenuity and how they were able to, provide some entertainment for themselves and keep themselves, entertained. So, and having a good
out
time.
of trouble too.
Yeah, right. This is a portrait of Coconut, and his name is Marshall, but we all called him Coconut, and Jeanette. They were living in an abandoned home on a street called Golden Gate. And this was a street that had several abandoned houses on it, but a lot of people were taking over these houses and living in them and converting them, like wood burning fire, heaters and stuff. And this was the room where they would do they're very religious, this couple here. So this was the room where they did their services on Sunday. So I took a portrait of them. They were a couple that just kind of got together when they both moved into this little community. But Golden Gate was really a wonderful little experience for me. And I photographed several people on that street as they were living in their houses. This is a portrait of Melanie. And this is a very sad story. While I was traveling in the early years in the city, I noticed a lot of women standing on street corners, and obviously they were prostitutes and selling their bodies for drugs. So Melanie was a pretty hardcore heroin addict, and I photographed about 100 of these women over a 3-year period. And they were all white women. There were no African-American women, and they were all mostly from the suburbs. And they lost their way coming into the city. So they were living under viaducts and abandoned houses. They left their families. It was one of the saddest things that I've ever photographed. And I tried getting some of them help, but every time they asked me or I asked them, they would just say, no, I don't want to go through withdrawal. I don't want to get dope sick. You know, I'd rather take the drugs than go through that terrible experience. So it was a very difficult thing to kind of photograph, but I wanted to photograph them, and there's a lot of them on my website that I've posted. But to me, I wanted people to look at them and think that they're just like normal people. They could be friends of theirs. They could be a relative. They could be someone who's you have no idea what their life is like, the pain that they've gone through. So I just always did a very simple way of photographing them, full frame, always same distance. And tried to do a typological kind of project on this, but it got pretty painful for me. I just quit after I did about 3 years of it. And the drugs were easy to get. The police didn't care. So it was very prevalent. It's gotten a lot better. I've noticed over the last couple of years that I've been making trips back to Detroit, I see very few women on the street anymore. So I'm kind of glad to hear about that. But the time I was doing this was, a hard time.
Yeah. So
So
we've got another
this-
question real quick, Dave, from Paul. He says he's from Detroit as well. He's done quite a bit of guerrilla photography in the city. He says you're carrying around some very valuable gear with you. Have you ever felt threatened downtown or had any incidents or theft? So have you felt safe while you're doing this work in the city, Dave?
Yeah, I always did. I think there's a misconception about Detroit in that people think there's so much crime there, but I went into some of the worst neighborhoods in the city dozens of times and met people who were the nicest people. So I never really had a problem with that. And I think, just being a friendly, open, honest person, maybe I'm being too, naive.
Yeah.
But I always felt that, I had my back covered for some reason. I never really felt threatened. I never felt like I was in the wrong place at the wrong time or anything like that. So
Yeah.
maybe I was
Melvin looks like he's got a nice smile and a welcoming face to you.
Yeah, this is Melvin. And actually I was talking to his mother on her porch. And we had a conversation, and I said, I see your son's out there playing, basketball in the street. I said, I really would love to photograph him. And she said, Melvin, get over here. This man wants to take your picture. And man, he just stopped everything, and just walked right over and said, sure, Mom, what's going on? And he was the greatest guy,
Everyone listens to Mom,
Yeah, he was very respectful to his mother and everything. And so I just, I put him down on the ground and photographed him. And what I saw when he crossed his arm was that tattoo that he had across his forearm, and it says trust. And I just thought that was such a wonderful element, the human part of this photograph that really ties it all together. And the look in his face was, just a very wonderful, warm kind of image. So one of my favorite portraits.
That's a great looking shot.
Yeah. This is Bebe, and his mother at the age of 36 passed away with an asthma attack. So he and his brother got this car and modified it with the gull wing doors and stuff, and as a memorial to his mother. So this is what kept them occupied and, dealing with their grief after she passed away. And that's a portrait of him. These are outdoor religious services that pastors often did in the summertime. not only to give the neighborhood a sense of safety and community, but also to attract new members to the church who would come and contribute to, to keep the church going. So this is just an outdoor ceremony that I was allowed to photograph. I asked permission, of course, first, and then they let me. These are cadets that were finishing their last training in the Detroit Police Department. And one of the things that the police department did was they did all their training out on the street. And it's kind of like a PR movement to show the people in the neighborhood that, hey, we're here for you. We're protecting you. We're using your tax dollars to keep you safe. Instead of like doing all this training behind closed walls, they were constantly going out every day and marching down the street. And this is in an abandoned strip mall where they were doing their training. So
Dave, we've got a question from Kenneth. He mentions that you had donated some prize money to Detroit. He's wondering if you had seen a positive result from that donation.
Yeah, I did. I won the AMIA AGO prize for photography in Canada. And that was a $50,000 prize. And I took all the money and gave it to different charities, different nonprofit organizations, gave it to some personal people that I knew really well in Detroit to help them out. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure there was a positive impact on giving any kind of a donation to an organization. So I didn't do any follow-up on these. I did a lot of research, and a lot of the people that I met during my trips to the city, I supported them. So yeah, that was I kept about $2,000 to myself and gave all the rest of the money away. But I felt it was an important thing to do for me. Just if you're going to photograph and become this involved,
Sure.
in all these people, if you have an opportunity to give back and help, then do it. So that's what I did. Yeah.
Very cool.
Thanks for asking. That was a nice thing.
Looking here at this image of Tom, I've got another question from Marco. He says, when you do your portraits, how important is the lighting and composition? And does that ever distract from the photographing of the subject? I mean, I guess he's questioning whether setup takes away from the actual capture, I guess.
No, I mean, all the time I'm working, I'm on a tripod. I'm a very deliberate photographer. I'm, kind of slow and clumsy, and, I'm moving, very precisely. I move an inch over one way or the other. So, the framing and the composition are always paramount to what I'm doing, but the subject is also paramount to what I'm doing. And it's kind of a collaborative effort when you're doing a portrait. So I give them plenty of time to relax. And like I said, we always have long conversations before the picture's taken. This was important to me to try to get to know these people. This is a picture of Tom, who I probably photographed Tom more than anybody else on my trips to Detroit. Probably have 20 portraits of him. But he was my most inspirational person of all the people that I ever met. He was homeless. He was kind of like an unemployed carpenter. He did a lot of carpentry work, but his jobs would last 6 months. He'd get laid off. We'd wait 6 months to get a job. He'd be homeless. He'd be sleeping on park benches. So finally, he just said, "Forget this. I'm gonna build my own houses." So he built a little doghouse structure about 5 by 5 feet on top of an abutment near the river, the Detroit River. And he lived there for like 7 years before he built his second house, which is the one behind him. And that was about the size of a small cabin. And he builds all these structures from discarded materials from construction sites. And he never buys anything. He just always finds whatever he needs. And he works with a saw and a hammer and a screwdriver and a tape measure and a pencil. That's about all he's got to work with. He has no electricity, no heat, no running water. And he lived on this little location for like 15 years. And the ladder behind him goes up to this large abutment that's about 15 feet tall, and there were old railroad tracks up there. And then he moved up there, and that's where he built a larger structure that was about 16 feet square. And he had been working on it for like 4 years. And the property was owned by CSX Railroad. And it was always considered private property, but it was so overgrown and abandoned that, you know, he's been living there for 15 years. It didn't, you know, who was going to bother him?
Yeah.
Well, the CSX Railroad came to him and said, "You're on private property. We're going to tear your houses down. We're going to tear your ladder and your steps and your structures that you built upstairs on the platform. We're going to tear all that down in 2 months if you don't leave." He never left. And last fall, when I went to visit him, there was nothing left of him. The entire area was plowed over, trees all removed. It was awful. And I haven't been able to find Tom since that time. So I don't know where he's at, whatever happened to him, if he left the city or what. But this was a man that, you know, lived there for 15 years. I mean, he almost had squatter's rights. If I knew I could hire a lawyer, I think we could have fought this, but I didn't know this was going to happen. He kept this all to himself. He never told anybody this was happening, so I didn't know. So anyway, it's a pretty
Sad story.
sad story, and every time I go back to Detroit, I try to, you know, look more for him. And I've got a couple of leads on my next trip back I'm going to look for. So hopefully we can find him again. This is a picture of Robert in his house that he grew up in. His parents passed away. The house fell into disrepair. He moved to California for several months and then moved back to Detroit and then came back into his house, and the entire house had been ransacked and stripped of all the metal and appliances and everything. So this is his first couple of months back into the city, trying to figure out what the heck he was going to do with the house that he was living in here. This is a picture of Samira, and it's in Kat's house. And Kat was a woman that I met who had decorated this empty lot next to her house and cut all the grass and decorated the trees and put in some bushes and stuff. And she was a fantastic woman. She was taking in all kinds of homeless people into her house and giving them shelter and food and clothing. And she did all this with just the grace of God and any donation that she could bring in. So this is just a child that was sleeping on her bed. And the mother was also living in that house with her. And sometimes when the house got so full of people, Kat would actually go to the house down the street, which was another abandoned house, and she would sleep in that house just to make more room for these people. So Kat was another person that I really fell in love with. She was fantastic. I visited her every time I went to Detroit. I would have dinner with her several times. So she was incredible.
Another question we have, Dave, and this is also from Kenneth, is how long do you spend with each subject, and do you find that the people want to share their story with you, or are they pretty open?
Yeah, I mean, 99% of the people that I photographed. I think there was one time I met a guy and we had about a 3-hour conversation, and I said, "But I'd love to take your picture," and he just said, "No, you're not taking my picture." I said, "Okay, that's great. No, I respect that." But
Sure.
everyone else, you know, I really, I'd go visit these people and I'd spend hours there before I'd pull a camera out. You know, it was almost like they were family. You know, it's the way we sort of looked at each other. So yeah, I mean, but some encounters, you know, lasted 5 minutes and that was it. They were gone.
Sure.
That could happen if you're just, you know, approaching someone on the street. You know, you're not really at their house or in a restaurant or somewhere. You know, you're just meeting them for the first time, and then you don't really
Sure.
get to learn too much more about them. But anyway, it varies, you know, from subject to subject.
Sure.
This is a picture of Tammy. She was living on Golden Gate Street with her boyfriend. So this is one day I took her photograph. What happened with this picture was another woman came up to us and demanded that I take her picture too. And I said, well, I'm just taking a picture of Tammy right now, you know, I'm kind of busy. But she got really irate and started having an argument with Tammy, and then they started struggling. So this person was obviously having some mental difficulties.
Sure.
So I kind of had to break up the altercation as best I could. So that then I took the picture of Tammy afterwards. So that's why she's looking the way she is. Her eyes are bloodshot. She was crying. She was distraught. She was upset. But we were able to kind of calm the situation down, and the other woman left. So so then I took her portrait after that encounter.
It wasn't Victoria.
No, it wasn't Victoria.
Okay, good.
Victoria was another prostitute that was working on the street, and she was a drug addict, and just another one of those really sad cases of wondering how they got this way, what happened, what turn in their life, you know, brought them to this point. But so I thought this was a very empathetic and you know, portrait of her.
So we've got a couple more questions, Dave, and
Yeah.
we are coming up here on our time limit. So I'm going to bring us back around to our images here. Let me see if I can pull us out of here. So some other questions would be, Kenneth has also asked, do you miss your studio days? Do you miss working, you know, commercially and in the studio, or do you like the more creative outlet you have now of going about what you want and doing what you want and not worrying about what others want?
I love them both. You know, I miss the social interaction with the studio work, you know, working with art directors and account executives and all the crew that I always hired when I did a shoot and stuff. So yeah, I miss that aspect of it. I'm much more of a private person now, just doing,
Yeah.
you know, my own thing, and I have a few friends, you know, it's kind of like,
yeah.
in this stage of my
and then DJ's asking, do you ever use a film-based camera? Do you ever shoot with film any longer?
Well, in my career, I shot 8x10 Ektachrome exclusively. That's what I did for 25, 30 years until I went digital in 2004. But I don't shoot film now. When I first went out photographing Chicago bridges in 2000, I did everything in 4x5 black and white. But after I bought the digital camera, I never went back to film. I just felt
looking back.
It's sort of pointless. I think digital's so much better than film. There's no question.
And another question, Dave, for you is, have you ever been approached by the police wondering what you were doing in the areas that you were shooting?
Sure. And they go, what the F are you doing here? Especially the Nocturne work that I was doing at night in Detroit, because I got stopped by more police at night wondering what the hell I was doing and wanting, you know, they thought I was crazy. You know, I said, what are you doing in this neighborhood? I said, well, I'm only going to be here for like 5 more minutes and I'm gone, you know, so I'm just doing photographs of buildings at night. Don't worry about it, you know. So, yeah.
Another question is, and I assume it's from Diego, and I assume he's asking, he says, they have the photos you've taken of them? So I guess he's asking if, do you ever provide the photographs of the people you're shooting? Do you ever give them copies of
all,
the imagery for them to have?
all the time. Every time I'd come back, I'd make a set of prints and I'd go to the person that I shot the session before, and I'd give them some prints all the time. Yeah, that was just a nice thank you, you know? And then I'd take
So
another
we have,
photo.
yeah, it's
And
all
then
about the photo.
they would
Yeah,
introduce me to one of
exactly.
their friends, and that would,
It,
then,
it, it,
you know,
it, it, it becomes a cycle. Yeah.
yeah, right, right. That's how you have to approach it. So,
Don has an interesting question. He says, you studied and received a BFA early in your career. I have been interested in photography all my life. At age 58, with a technical background in engineering, I'm considering getting into professional photography. I now realize that I have a large void in my education knowledge with respect to art and composition. Can you give me any advice on filling this void or getting into photography professionally? So I guess, what knowledge can you impart after all these days of taking pictures?
well, I guess you have to be talented for one. You have to be aggressive. You have to be dedicated. You have to be passionate. You have to love what you're doing. All of these things, you know, kind of combine to let you at least pursue a career like that. And if you're lucky, you'll make it. A lot has to do with luck, but a lot has to do with a lot of hard work as well, you know, and dedication. But it's a combination of all those elements that come together. But I have to say myself, I think just the passion, the love of photography really, really propels you to succeed. You have to keep going at it. You know, don't give up.
Yeah. Be tenacious. Dave, I have a question for you. Do you
Yeah.
derive any of your concepts or let's say composition or color? Do you derive any of that from any other art form other than photography? Do you study painting? Do you know?
Nah, yeah, man, I mean, I'm familiar with all kinds of famous painters, but no, I think photographers are obviously my main influence. Stephen Shore uh, was one of them. Alex Soth, contemporary photographer. Another one, Victoria Sembenarnes. I love her work. Yeah, I mean, um, I don't know if you could say I have a particular palette to my work or not. You know, when I do all the night work, you're confronted with, you know, 3 or 4 different sources of light, colored light. So you have to pick a choice that you want that works with that particular photograph. And every picture is sort of like a different decision about which way to go with that. I mean, I have photographs where the sky is green, sky is purple, it's blue, it's gray. I mean, there's no real consistency to the skies that I photograph, but I'm always looking at one particular item or something in the photograph that has a particular color to it that I want to sort of neutralize or focus on. And that varies tremendously from picture to picture. So do I have a palette? I don't know. Maybe. It's probably just,
So,
no, go ahead.
so now again, another question. This is from Robin. What are your thoughts about people in your images and how they affect the portrayal of the neighborhoods? Do you feel people transform the images away from depicting the larger sense of the neighborhood? And how do you explain the two types of photos, people photos versus no people photos? Do you prefer one over the other, I guess? People bring a sense of realism to the photos.
Well, it always, for me, it always depended on what's the purpose of what I'm doing. If I have to photograph people, I have to photograph people to get my message across. And I have to like continue with that. That's what the whole Detroit Unbroken Down project was about. But those people that are in those neighborhoods, I don't try to disparage or make anybody look bad in my photographs, even though they're living in some of the worst neighborhoods in the city. That never really entered my mind. I was always respectful that they were even allowing me into their lives to photograph them. So You can see a lot of the distressed environments in the photographs that I've taken, but the person in the photograph is not disparaged in any way because of that. At least that I've tried that to, I mean, when you look at me, I'm a white guy in a poor black neighborhood most of the time. I'm a privileged guy, and taking that premise into an environment that you didn't live in or didn't grow up in is a very heavy thing to deal with. So you have to be, as a person, as humble and respectful as you can be when you're with people like that, because they didn't get there because they wanted to. So anyway, but the building's pictures at night, I kind of always thought of when I'm taking a picture of the building, it's more like a portrait of the building. It's I kind of treat it the same way, same kind of level of respect.
Yeah. Well, that series, the Detroit Nocturne, was a great series, and unfortunately, we didn't have time to show it today. But we'd like to mention that Dave's got a website. It's DaveJordano.com, and you can take a look at his work there as well. I think we've got another question here that's a good question to wrap up on. I'm going to assume that Kenneth knows you or knows a little bit about you, because his question is, do you find shooting with your wife offers a full circle of enjoyment and creative competition? So I'll let you go ahead and answer that one, and we'll end up on that question and answer.
Yeah, we have a lot of fun. She's very creative. We both studied photography. We both graduated from the same class. She's been my partner for almost 50 years. So we started doing night photography together. And she's got her own Instagram page. It's Jeanette.Kuhn, Kuhn, if you want to go to her Instagram page and see her work. And we really love going out and photographing together. And we're actually going to go out tonight and do some work. So yeah, it's
very cool.
Yeah, we have fun. Yeah.
Well, I just want to say thanks for joining us, Dave. Thanks for giving us your time, and more importantly, giving us your imagery and the vision of Detroit as how you see it, and trying to share that with the rest of us. So again, thanks for your time, and thanks for joining us. John, thanks to you and Roberts for helping us with this and being a part of it. And again, if you want to see more of Dave's work, it's DaveJordano.com or at Dave.Jordano on Instagram if you want to follow him. And we thank you for joining us today in another of our series of Artist Talks with Roberts Camera. So I hope you all have a good rest of your day, and enjoy the day. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me.
This webinar.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, guys.